Hello and welcome to the third episode of Impact Club. May peace be upon you. I'm your host, Sabah Fatima. Our guest today is an embodiment of courage, grace, and sheer talent. Amal Kassir is a Syrian American international storytelling activist, an educator, and a poet, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. She has performed in 13 countries and over 60 cities, including Geneva at the United Nations. She has lectured, performed poetry, and taught workshops in venues ranging from orphanages to refugee camps to universities to TED Talks. Amal designed her own undergraduate major titled Community Programming and Social Psychology, where she has been able to create programs for a range of causes and communities, from businesses threatened by gentrification to poetry workshops for refugee students to counterterrorism websites for the Department of Homeland Security. Amal is now working on her first book. Amal, I'm so excited to have you here. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, Sabah. I'm so good. Thank you so much for that lengthy introduction. I appreciate it.
I mean, I can go on about you, but tell me about your journey from poetry to storytelling activism. How did it all start and what inspired you to pursue it?
You know, it's one of those things where I almost feel like it was chosen for me as opposed to something that I pursued. I was always very passionate, very guided by my emotions since I was a young girl, always very focused on the plight of people. You know, we had Arabic television, so we constantly had exposure to things that were happening in Palestine, that were happening in other parts of the world. So we grew up with this mindfulness. And when I actually did write my first poem, it I didn't know it was a poem. I thought it was just a speech, but there were so many metaphors and everything woven into it. So I almost believe that poetry is just my dialect, and storytelling activism is really where my work resides, you know. So I started off just on like little stages in high school, and alhamdulillah, because of the conflict that was happening in Syria, there became a purpose for my voice, there became a need for my voice, and that's where it went, just from poetry into storytelling activism, where I got to share the plight of what was happening to my people.
And just having to listen to you has been deeply moving to anyone. I mean, I have seen testimonials where people who wouldn't necessarily be affected by war have been affected. So that itself is commendable. I congratulate you for your work.
It's an issue of humanity, and I really think that, you know, when you tug at the heartstrings, these are the
Mhm.
strings that are inside everybody. So it's a
Yes.
language we all know.
That's absolutely right. Um, Describe your typical working day. What does Amal do from morning to evening? How does that go?
I love this question because if you asked me maybe 2 years ago, I couldn't have given you a real answer. But I think because of COVID-19,
Mhm.
it required us all to sort of take a step back and almost held up a mirror to us and our actions and our habits. On a daily basis these days, I wake up and I have a morning routine. Um, I do my prayers in the morning. I write 3 pages of free consciousness writing. It's called the morning pages. If anyone who's
Wow.
interested in really pursuing it. You know what's funny? I had this journal and it was wide ruled instead of college ruled. So I was like, this is so easy. But then I got a college ruled notebook. I'm like, this is actually a lot harder than I expected. It takes a lot more time. It's about a 20-minute commitment. And I do certain things to fill my cup in the morning, including filling it with coffee, right? So I make sure I do get my exercise done and everything. And then I move into my work block. I am married, so I do have to sometimes switch out my artist hat for my wife hat, and, like, you know, cook a meal in the middle of the day. But for the most part, I try as much as possible to engage with art as much as possible, whether that's the art of knowledge, whether that's, you know, the art of poetry, or even just the
Mhm.
visual arts. So that's a consistent commitment I make on a daily basis. On my best days, we don't all have our best days though.
That's true.
Yeah.
And speaking of your art, how do your poems and stories develop? Take us through the stages.
I love this question. There are a variety of ways that this art can manifest. Sometimes it's very intentional. And I recently learned from, some guru on the internet that inspiration will come when discipline has been established. And I think oftentimes we think it's the other way around, where we have to just wait till we're inspired and then we'll discipline ourselves to finish the work. So a lot of my work these days is very effortful. There's a lot of like free writing, and then I'll like extract the good ideas that come from it and then build from there. But then, of course, you have the days where you're in the shower or you're driving or you're walking down the street and an idea comes and the poem falls into place and just hits you all at once. So those are the gift for sure. And we all love those, but that might only happen once or twice a year. Everything work.
I have heard like people struggling when writing is like when you have written one or two lines that came from a source of inspiration, but they struggle to go on, right? So,
Yeah.
so what do you do when that happens to you?
You have to just keep going. And the most important thing is battling the critic. The critic is the voice inside of you that's going to tell you, this is ugly, this sucks, you're terrible, no one's going to like what you have to write. So here's a copy of my book that I have in front of me, and I have a sticky note while I'm writing, while I'm reading my work, and I write down all my fears on it. I write down all of the critic and the lines that come in my head. We have to honor our consciousness. We have to let our minds just go, whether it's ugly or not. Ugly writing will produce the most beautiful results. Gold is shoved into ugly rocks that we would not pay notice to, if we were just walking by. So I would strongly encourage that if you are stuck and you wrote these two amazing lines, the lines will still be there. Just keep on writing and writing and writing until something beautiful happens. And when your critic starts to criticize you, respect it, write those things down, and continue with your work. Do not let it interrupt you.
That is amazing advice. So, who are some of your favorite poets and authors?
I came across a poet recently that honestly, every once in a while, you will find someone that just speaks to you. And my most recent favorite poet, his name is Craig Santos Perez, and he's based in Honolulu, Hawaii. And he writes these love poems that are like infused with environmental language. He talks about climate change. He talks about plastic in the ocean. He talks about all of these awful issues that are taking place and really, really connects them to love, humanity, and the like. But my top favorite artist would be Naomi Shihab Nye, who, when I read her work, it was the first time, and this was only like last year, it was the first time that I really felt spoken to by someone who looked like me. Because I'd read poems of like Black men and white men and men, a lot of
Yeah.
men, and these amazing pieces that inspired me, that challenged me intellectually. But when I came across Naomi Shihab Nye, and I actually read her story, she's half Arab, half white, just like me. And and I really encourage people, you'll hear the opposite advice sometimes, but I encourage people, read poets who look like you. Read poets who come from your background, because you share in the same culture, in the same language, in the same recipes, and it's very, very empowering. But other than that, Amir Suleiman, no poet has ever rattled me to my core like Amir Suleiman. He is a Black poet based out of somewhere in the United States, the first Muslim poet I was ever exposed to. And his performance is powerful. His page poetry is powerful. I've never been blown away quite like him as far as like the rattle in my soul. So those are my three for now.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And you know what's great about listening to some of your favorite authors and the work is the fact that they have been able to combine activism and what they're fighting for with their art, which is so profound that I think you have been doing that too, and you're continuing to do that. So that for me itself was so inspiring, just to think how I can transform something that I love into a message for humanity.
I love it.
Awesome. And speaking of challenges and adversities, we have all had our share, and you more than the most. What were the toughest challenges that you had to overcome?
You know, I'm not gonna lie. When you sent me the email with some of the questions to expect, I was most nervous about that one because I was like, how deep do we go? You
Mhm.
know, and I tried thinking of a way to frame this so that everyone can connect to it. And you know, Alhamdulillah, I genuinely believe that our struggles are a gift. They are a mercy from God. And when we struggle, that is the only way we could possibly grow. We cannot grow in comfort. It's impossible. And I think about, you know, things like war. My family has carried the war in Syria.
Mhm.
Um, I think of things, you know, like house fires. I think of things like, you know, premature births in the family. All of these different things, but there is no greater war than the war you fight against yourself, against your own nafs. And by far, Islamophobia compared to the war of the nafs, piece of cake, right?
Mhm.
All of these other things, piece of cake compared to the battle within. And I say this because the struggles outside of the body, they're going to reverberate inside of our chests, and the dialogue that happens inside, the struggles that happen inside, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's the laziness or the pessimism, the negativity, whatever it is, the war inside is going to really determine how capable you are of surviving the wars outside. So I would say that my greatest struggles have been the ones inside. They have been battling my nafs, and strongly, without a doubt, mental health. That is
Mhm.
a difficult struggle, I think, for a lot of us.
Yes. And speaking of internal struggles, we know that most of the time those are not spoken about a lot, um, because a lot of us tend to bury them. A lot of us tend to, those things emanate in the form of anger or depression, but a lot of us struggle with looking at it in a healthy way. So how do I find out a way to cope with my illness, mental or emotional, in a healthy way? And I think
it, I love this question. There's so much to unpack in it. And
yes.
the first thing I'm going to say is if you need professional help, get professional help.
Hmm.
I think the stigma around mental health, it's so ironic because it's like we bring so much shame to ourselves because, oh, I need help going through something. But all of the ills that we deal with inside of our home are a product of the society. So mental illness can correlate directly to the state of society, which means society has a responsibility to help you through it. So we should not shame ourselves and act like, oh, you know, you're sick, there's something wrong with you. No, you are a reflection of your society, and your society has a duty to serve you. So if it's come to the point where you do need some sort of professional intervention, just do it. It's so normal now. People just aren't public about it. Normalize seeking help. But for those who might not feel like that's really what they need, there is a lot of reflection that's required. And we have to sort of know, what are the demons that are inside of us crawling about? Shame is a huge demon, especially, you know, I'm half Arab, so I get to see the demons of both cultures, right? So that even my demons are diverse. Gotta write that poem.
Yep.
But you see some of the struggles in both worlds, and things like shame, things like putting yourself down, things like dishonoring yourself, things like letting that critic we talked about when we write, letting that own your life. These are going to be a lot of the battles we have to face. And I strongly, as a writer, how can I not encourage using writing as a tool? But
Mhm.
there's something in academia, it's called the meaning making framework. And it essentially asserts that until you get something out, whether it's on paper, whether it's vocally in a conversation with a therapist or something, whether it's like even in clay, in pottery, whatever it is, until you get it out, it will stay inside of you and it will fester and it will become toxic. So relieve yourself of what's inside and do the journaling. There have
Mhm.
been times when I've journaled something and I'm like, I always think when I die, people are going to see my journals. And I know a lot of writers do too. And so if it's that severe, burn the paper after you're finished with it. Get rid of the evidence, but
Mm-hmm.
let it out. And that's the key, because the longer we keep it in, the longer the demons of shame and the demons of rage and envy and hatred, those diseases of the heart, they will take over, and it will manifest in your actions, in your attitude, in the energy you emit, in how you treat your children and your spouse. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's so important to figure out the best way to actually process these things. I love art because art makes it so that you don't really know what the artist is dealing with. You don't entirely know, but so many artists have mental health issues that they're processing through their art. There's liberation that comes with it. So if you want to be a little more subtle, do it, but write and share and get it out of you. And you will come to find that there will be a lot of insight that's inside of you, but you have to explore it. That's essentially what therapy is. It's exploration. It's not diagnosis. It's not an,
Yeah.
it's exploration.
I mean, hearing that has given me hope. And where does Amal, whose name means hope, seek hope and comfort from?
Ah, subhanallah, I always think how there were times in my life where the only hope I had was my name. I had no hope, but my name was hope. And so in a way, that was always my silver lining, right? Um, I want to talk about marriage for a second.
Hmm.
And what is the topic of most songs on the radio, most poems that we hear, most movies we watch? It's love.
Yes.
Love is the most dominant topic. And I'm almost 2 years married, and the reason why I want to talk about it is because the fact that when we work hard to be the best people we can be, and we have to work very hard, keep
Yes.
that in mind, it does not come easy. Oh my God, it might be even harder than anything else. But when we work hard to achieve our best selves, when we are able to put down our egos, I kid you not, in the state of pure, genuine, kind, blessed love, you will be able to find paradise on earth. You will be able to see what mankind is capable of. You will see the kindness. You will see the forgiveness. You will see the mercy. You will see the generosity. Um, and I genuinely believe that for me, that was the environment where, one, I found most healing, but also where I found most difficulty to get to that healing, right? But love gives me
Mm.
hope. Long story short, it's watching relationships happen, whether it's the mother and the child, whether it's our parents, who are still in love, whether it's between you and your spouse, even between, like, there were stories that came out of Syria, and some of the stories that came out of Syria made me question humanity. They redefined evil for me every time something would come out. But then you'd hear a story of a man who, no matter how bad the slaughter got, he would stop and he would share his meal with the cats in the neighborhood. This is love. This is love. And I think the capacity for human beings to be kind with each other and love each other, no matter how difficult it gets, this is really where I draw hope from. But I don't draw hope from the big picture. I have to draw hope from the details. And
Hmm.
I, I think that our ability to pay attention to those details will give us the ability to have delight for the small things. When the birds chirp in the morning, this gives me hope. When there is love, this gives me hope. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. And I'm moved by your answer. And, I have been married for a year too. So I understand what kind of transformation and, um, the you know yourself better when you share it with when you share your life with someone else.
Oh,
I think.
absolutely. Amir Suleiman, that poet I told you about, I actually met his wife. And I
Oh,
asked
wow.
her before I got married, I was like, what advice do you have? She told me, and it wasn't like a sweet, like, la, 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 la. It was more like a warning. She said, get ready to know yourself.
Wow.
Ain't that the truth, right?
Yes. Can you share a story or an incident from the impact of your work that deeply moved you?
Oh, hmm. You know, I go back to this a lot because, as a Syrian American, as a Muslim American more so, scratch the Syrian, let's talk Muslim American. Our identity naturally is going to be tied to all the countries in the world.
Mhm.
My identity is tied to Afghanistan. My identity is tied to Iraq. It's tied to Somalia. It's tied to these countries who experience war, who experience struggle, who experience pain, who are victim of the military industrial complex, who have American bombs that my tax dollars pay for falling on their homes. And so this naturally makes me an anti-imperialist, without a doubt. I'm
Mhm.
not here and praise the big guys. Absolutely not. But I remember multiple times when I was traveling a lot, of course, before COVID-19, before the pandemic. Um, every time after a poetry event in cities in America that like some of these people had never seen a Muslim in their life, not to mention a Muslim woman, right? And I got to share my story. I got to get on stage, speak for an hour, share some poetry, share some stories, all of those things. And afterwards, I kid you not, the ones that would move me were always the stories of US veterans,
Mhm.
men who fought in wars, who come up to me and tell me, like, I can feel what you're talking about. Like, I can relate to your family in Syria and what they're going through. These men who, for all I know, they have killed my people, whether it's by choice or not, because we know there's a power structure involved. And a lot of these men are poor men who this is their only choice. And when they come to me and they tell me this and they feel seen and they see me, I think that this is just so moving. And it shows that even the US soldier and the little Muslim girl,
Mhm.
they are able to stand on the same ground when their hearts are the ones speaking. Um,
And I think there is a little bit of healing in that.
and it almost, I wonder what they take away.
Mhm.
I wonder how they reflect on some of the things that they've done and some of the views that they've had. Um, and I know war is traumatizing. And I think even in my book, I I think about the men and the impact that men have under the guise of war, because
Mhm.
this is difficult. Whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, if you're carrying a gun, the nightmares will follow you. It doesn't
Yes.
matter. The PTSD will follow you. And, all of my messages come from my religion.
Mhm.
All of my knowledge of humanity come from my faith. And so Allahu Alam, there's wisdom in this. And I hope that this wisdom serves them too.
Subhanallah.
SubhanAllah.
And what are your plans for the future?
My plans for the future. Um, right now, I every Wednesday at 11 o'clock CST, I run a writing workshop called the Wednesday Writing Hour. And it's grown into such a beautiful, prosperous community. And I'm building something called House of Amal. So inshallah, what you can expect in the year is a lot of opportunity for education, mentorship, and eventually some publishing. So the goal right now, we are building a publishing house, and we have a lot, everything is falling into place, alhamdulillah. So that's the biggest thing. The other is, inshallah, I think that there is no greatest form of activism than starting a family. And I
Mhm.
look at all the mothers in the world and I look at how truly, without a doubt, I mean, heaven is under their feet because they are the ones who create the men and the women that are going to do good in this life. So start a family, end the wars all over the world peace, all of that fun stuff. Those are all my goals.
That is awesome. I wish you the best. What advice would you like to give to aspiring poets, writers, activists?
Conquer the critic.
Mm.
My advice to you is conquer the voice in your head that is telling you that you cannot do this. Write. until something happens. That is a quote by a friend named Tariq Toure. He's a poet based in Michigan. Write until something happens. And read poets as well. Poets that look like you and poets that don't. Dead white guys and, living black guys. Read everything in between, because this is going to inform what the common wisdoms are. And the best of poetry can be translated into every single language, because wisdom is the universal language of mankind. So learn wisdom, get to know yourself as deeply as possible. And as deeply as you know yourself, your writing will match that depth as well.
And with that, we've come to the end of the episode. I want to thank you so much to join me here today. Thank you, and may Allah grant you the best in dunya and in the hereafter. To the listeners, thank you for tuning in. You can find Amal's House of Amal in the description of the podcast. And I shall see you next time.
Sabah, thank you so much. Thank you, listeners. Jazakallah khair and salamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.